Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, I'm going to be explaining exactly what port scanning is and what a port is, because before you can actually start interacting with ports, before we start talking about TCP, sending, specially crafted packets with, various TCP headers to particular ports and then awaiting responses, we actually need to understand what a port is, right? And how ports work in relation to the device or their host, and how you can communicate with a port, right? So let's in this particular video, I'm just going to be using a whiteboard just because it helps it helps explain things a whole lot simpler, right? So we have let's take a simple example, right? On your computer, let's say you have a computer. Every individual computer has ports, right? Now you can think of ports as particular services that you can run on that computer. So for example, if you wanted to run a web server, let's say you wanted to host a web server, that would run on port 80 or port 443. And that's how people would be able to access your computer. Because remember, your computer has an IP address, right? And that is how this IP address is a unique identifier that allows everyone on the internet or specific people or specific individuals to find you. And if they open their browser and enter your IP address, so let's say your IP address is 192.168.1.1. So this is just a user who enters, this is their browser, and they enter your IP here, 168.1.1. What it's going to do is it's going to connect to your IP address, and it's going to connect to this particular port because this user here is requesting for the web page, and it does that typically through port 80 or port 443. So that's an example of a port. We have port 80. We have about 65,535 ports on a single device, and they all interact through two protocols, which we'll explore in this section. One of them is TCP and UDP, and these protocols essentially control how the connection is made to these ports and what the requests and responses can be like. However, for now, I just want you to ignore TCP and UDP, and let's just focus on the ports. So as I said, we have a total of 65,535 ports that can be run on a device or on a host or on a computer, whatever you want to call it. And you typically have the most common ports that are used for common services, as I said, like running a web server. So for example, starting from the smallest number going to the highest one, we can start naming a few of the most common ports. So for example, port 21 is FTP, that is your file transfer protocol. We will have a PDF in the resources section of this video to where you can download that, and that contains a list of all ports and the various services running on it. You can look at it as sort of a cheat sheet. So then you have port 22, which runs SSH, right, which is your secure shell. We have 23, which is Telnet. SSH replaced Telnet. You then have port 25, which is SMTP. That is your simple mail transfer protocol. And then after this, let's see, what do we have? We have something. Let's see, port. We have 53, which is DNS, right? DNS works on UDP. The rest of these work on TCP. And again, as I said, for now, just disregard the protocol that they use. So we have port 53, we have port 80, which I said is HTTP, and we can keep going on and on. And again, for example, let's just continue a little bit further. We have a port 110, which is POP3, which is your post office protocol, which is an email protocol similar to SMTP. You then have port 445, which is SMB, right? And we'll be taking a look at SMB enumeration later on during the course. We have tons of other other protocols that you can look at, and again, this will all be linked in the resources section. So again, going back to our earlier example, right? Every computer has a port, and it's a means of providing a service or hosting a service on that particular device. And you'll find that, for typical or standard computers, they also have various ports open based on, the vectors that they might be, or the services they might be providing. So for example, a web server would typically have a port 80 open or port 443 open for HTTPS connections. It would then have port 22, which is SSH, open for 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 remote connections into the box for management, and then it would have something like maybe SMB. It could also have FTP for transferring files through FTP, so it could also have FTP, so on and so forth, and it can have as many services as required. It could also be handling email, so 25 SMTP. And now these ports, when we're talking about ports usually have statuses, right? Or their current state. So a port, like as we saw with Nmap during the Nmap scan, we have the port, and then we have the state, and then we have the service, right? So we can look at it that way. So for example, let's say we have port 21. That is the state is open, right? So that means we can actually we can send requests to that port. We can initiate communication. We can then establish communication with a protocol like TCP, and we can also, we have established communication through that port. And this, again, as I said, is FTP. And then we have port 22, which is we can say that's open as well. And that is SSH, right? And then maybe let's say we have, let's see, let me think of a interesting port here. Let's say we have port 80. Well, not port 80. Let's say we have port 23, which is telnet, and that can be closed, right? So we don't want to enable access to port 23, even though the service may be running. You can disable the service, but it could be still installed. So that is running telnet, and you get the idea. So what Nmap does is, if a device is running all of these services, what Nmap does is it sends a request to all the ports on the target, right? So it sends a request. So let's say we have we have a port here, we have a port here, another port, another port. So Nmap sends a request to that port, and then based on the response it gets from the port, Nmap is able to tell, hey, this port is open or closed. So in this case, we can say it's open if it gets a request. So let's say Nmap sends it again, and this time it doesn't get a response. So Nmap says, hey, that might be closed, so on and so forth. And of course, it gets much more complicated than this, but I just wanted to introduce you to the concept of a port if you don't have a good understanding of it already, before we start taking a look at the OSI model and the various the important layers, like the transport layer and the network layer. And then we'll start talking about the important protocols, which are TCP and UDP. And then we'll end up with taking a look at the TCP header flags, which are very important with Nmap. And yeah, that's primarily going to be the focus of this module. Very, very important module if you want to understand how Nmap works. So that's going to be it for this video, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.